buttons. Hey, so yes, I can't lie with that introduction. I have the Polyend Play here and it's been so much fun to sit and play with this device. For anyone that doesn't know, this is an 8 sequence, so all these rows here. It's a sampler based groovebox, so we got some really nice sample features, we have some nice generative features as well, and it makes a really intuitive little box, and it's been something I've been using since November, so I've been playing around with it and trying to learn the ins and outs before making an informed decision and putting it out to you guys. But it is being a really big lifesaver because at the moment I'm being pretty time poor, but just being able to sit down in the play, and I'm hoping I illustrate it, it's been something that's been a bit of a lifesaver at the moment. So why do I have the Play? Now, I was in the market for some sort of sampler groovebox that sort of touch on generative territory, more of that generative stuff, because I do have my MPC 1000, but I do like running all these machines in different interesting ways, creating patterns and just letting mathematical formulas and that run off into the right. So just wanted something that wasn't the computer that handled that in this space. And yeah, there was a few different options out there, and then Polyend released their Play and I was super interested to learn more about it, but because I've already have the Polyend tracker, I didn't want to sort of go out and get another 8 sequence mono sample, so I sort of sat on my hands. And yeah, one day I was chatting to Polyend and they were gracious enough to actually send this out just before Christmas. So yes, disclaimer, I didn't pay for the Play with my own money, and I sort of did receive it just before Christmas time. So thank you, Polyend, for the Christmas present. And yeah, they had no say on this video, and they're going to see the video as soon as everyone else is seeing this video. So we'll see what they think of that bit of introduction there. But yeah, I really wanted to sit down with the Play for a couple of months to sort of understand how the machine worked and sort of go through and like stress test those features that really drawn me into, especially that button there. So instead of just keep waffling, let's get straight into it. Alright, we're here with the Polyend Play, and I do apologise first. I do have the aircon running right now because it's particularly spicy down under right now. So I just wanted to touch first on the actual form factor of the Polyend Play because I find it really interesting. Because when I first got my tracker, I sort of did that in the review where I was talking about might be a little bit too big to be a portable devices. Like here's an A4 sheet of paper, which is pretty close to like the US letter paper. But growing up with the Polyend tracker as well as with the Play now, I'm really enjoying this form factor. Like it's small enough to be able to fit into a backpack. Like it is quite a thin unit to work with, but it's also big enough that each of the buttons or variables or whatever we want to tweak is within reach. Like there is a menu here and it's slight menu diving, but nearly every single function that you're going to be using to make music with is right here that we can work with. The other really interesting point that I found on the Play is these buttons or these potentiometers right here, because they're infinite rotary coders for one, so they just continually scroll. They have a bit of resistance. It's not like a clicky style rotary encoder, but they also got capacitive touch, and in electronic terms, capacitive touch is like how your iPhone or your smartphone can detect your finger where it is. So it's using that to be able to detect if you're touching the unit. So that's got some features I find really interesting about how this unit runs. All these buttons around the outside are mechanical keys, so they feel really nice, and you can feel when you're hitting them. You can see when you're hitting them as well. And the other big part of this, nearly taking up half the device, is this 20x8 button grid here. So silicon buttons, quite easy to do this motion on, which I find really handy, which we'll get over. But they're also RGB lights, so the Polyend tracker, they're just on or off. And then here we have RGB lights, and provides a lot of context to what's going on, even if they're not labeled around the outside. Like some of these have the labels underneath. If you hold shift, you can see the like alternative what they're doing. When we get into the performance area, this lights up, but after a bit of time, just having the colors there allowed me in my mind to see what I'm trying to do. All right, the unit's on, and this is where it gets really interesting, because that capacitive touch I was sort of highlighting before, how they implemented it expands on the device. Like right now we can see under each one here, but we can't really tell what the value is. So if I just click on one of these, it's going to populate the information about that into this little 3-inch screen here. And when I first saw the little 3-inch screen, I'm wondering like how much information is going to be there. But just how we interact with the device is going to contextually tell us what's happening here, which I find really interesting. Now, if we want to change a value, we can change it like that. There's another feature. If we double tap, it's going to come and switch the value down here. But we can also use these two buttons to change the value, as well as we can use this rotary encoder to change the value. So there's a few different ways we can interact with things, as well as if we go into the performance mode, this is that RGB colored stuff that I was talking about. And if we select all our tracks, we can start pressing around here, and similar again, that screen's going to tell us, as long with the device itself, it's going to actually show us what we're currently pressing. And there's a few different ways we can press and hold these silicon buttons to do certain things. Like if I tap here, it's going to stay on, but if I tap and hold and then let go, it's going to turn itself off. So there's a few different ways we can use each individual element to interact with our music, and how you interact with it is going to change that up. So I found that really fascinating. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all the little shortcuts in that, because there's quite a few. I'll talk more about the sequencer in a bit, because I just want to talk a bit about the sample engine itself, because I've found it quite useful. So with the tracker, like how you bring sounds in, this one works with, like, we can bring individual files in. So we can go into the menu by clicking this rotary encoder and then go to samples. So we can go load files or folders, so we can go load individual samples, but where I think the power of the play is through these sample packs. And I do commend Polyend. They have given us a whole bunch of really nice samples to work with, minus the ones I've been throwing in there to see what I can do with the play. But each one of these, if we go inside, are being separated up by these files, which is really important. So I've already loaded a sample pack in, and right now we can go through and scrub all the different sounds, and it does give us context on what the sound file is doing, but they're separated up by these files. So inside one of these files, we have all the different sounds relating to that file. So it's all like a nested file system, but then they've gone through and written all these ways that we can use these files and the samples themselves to create these interactive grooves. All right, I've chosen a sound, and I just want to explore this sound engine a bit, because there's some nice features to help us manipulate our samples. So it is a sample engine, so I've just picked this lo-fi C chord, and if we want to change the note itself, we can come into here and then scroll up and down our note, which is like any sort of pitch shifting. The more we go up, the shorter our sample will be, vice versa going down, the longer our sample is going to be. But we don't need to control the actual note value here. If we go view, we get this keyboard view right here. So I found this really useful to play with notes. I'm just going to leave that on as we go through. We can sort of shift the microtone. So if it's a little bit off, or we want to create that sort of like it's out of tune effect, we can do that. Like the volume, we have the panning as well, so we can change how it's going from left and right. The filter itself, so we've got like a high pass and a low pass, and then we can change the... we can also manipulate the part of the sample we want, so we can clamp it down into that particular section. So if I want to take a lot of the, so it's just like a little pop. That's kind of cool. So it comes with a basic attack and decay style envelope, and paired with the start and end points, you can really shape in the sound that you want. So we can give this sort of piano a little bit more of a rolled in start, Alright, so that's the basics of the sample engine itself. Like, we can change the pitch, we can give it a bit of a filter, and we can sculpt it to what we need. But now we can apply some live effects. So we have a reverb, we have a delay, and we have an overdrive and a bit depth. So they're controlled by these two knobs here. But where it's got this big room here, this is one of the little areas that I think is really special about the Polyend Play is its preset style effects. So this is currently the reverb effects. So if you go shift and view, they'll bring them up, and then we can pick the type of reverb that we want, and that's going through each one, and it's create like a different style. So as we go through, like, you can pick the one that you think is closest to what you need and keep working on and building something interesting. It's also the custom one that's part of the 1.2 that's added. So with just those 8 knobs, we've got our sample put together, and we can test it out here. But now I think this is a really good time to shift over to the sequencer, because if anything about this device, that's what's really special about this thing. And this works through their pick and play sort of system. So we've picked our sound, we've gone through and made all the changes, and now we get to place it by just pressing a button, and that's just put all that information into that one little spot there. So if we play it, it will play that sound. So we could pick a different note. So this is why I like this. So I might want to shift to there, and then I could shift down to there, then come back up to here. We'll turn it down. It's a bit fast for loafer. Cool. And yeah, that's not just the notes itself, it's all those little changes. So if I want to say change the note itself, so I could get rid of that, put that one down there, and then cool. All right, so anything that we do up here, we can actually bring it down into the sequencer itself. And I hope this has demonstrated a point, because we're not just limited to 8 samples. Like, this is our drum, this is our snare, this is our hi-hat. We can change each individual point. So we can have 8 sounds playing at once, or 8 samples, and that can change depending on the sequence. So similar to the tracker, we can get a lot more out of 8 tracks. And this is where I want to sort of highlight some of the little features that I really enjoy, because it is a pick and place, but how do I place a pick? And like, say with this one is different to, so we've got 28 loaded, but what happens if I want to load this? If I hold it, it's going to put this back into all this sample memory. So where those rotary encoders really come important, like they're not on fixed values, I can push back information into the sample engine as well. And if I want to like copy and paste it around, like I could like go shift and then copy and then select another point here, or just make sure I select another point like that. And then we can go paste, and then that's a lot of steps. So if I hold one of these down, you'll see it flash, and then I can just put that wherever I want. And like all those sort of little things just make life so much easier. But you don't have to manually place stuff down. And that's when I really started thinking this is really cool. Like what I'm going to do now, so we have some notes set down. What I might do is I'm just going to copy them, and I'm going to paste them down here. And I'm just going to delete this row up here. So as you can see, I'm using shift and then pressing the corresponding one. So now I've got all that there. I'm going to select these 3 lines here. So this row here is like select the track, and then I'm going to use these fill buttons. And I think this is really cool with the Polyend Play, being able to generate different patterns in a variety of different ways. Like it's not just a randomizer. So if we go into our fill tool, like we do have a randomizer, and that's just going to plonk stuff down willy-nilly. So that's one cool way. We do have a Euclidean function. So this is going to put down so many units equally along the part. So if we got 5, it's going to try and equally space it in 15. Yeah, that's quite interesting. But the next one, beat, What Polyend has done is they've gone through and made a whole bunch of different drum tracks for different styles of music. So each one of these is a particular beat, and how we had those files. So if I go back over here, we'll deselect them so we can see what's going on. Hi-hat, that's one, kick, and then we should have a snare. There we go. So what this beat function is doing is it's looking for those files named kick, kick, snare, and hat. Not the whole hi-hat, just hat. And then what it does is it's using that to generate a style of groove that's fitting in one of these styles. So if I just pick like a acoustic drum sound, fill, play. Straight off the bat, that sounds like something I can start working with, and we can quickly change it to something else if we didn't like it. So, well, if we don't like the samples, we can hit fill again, because what's happening is it's going into those files and then selecting samples in that sort of genre. This is where it can get really generative, because I don't have to like say I want that sort of kick and that sort of snare. I can sort of break it down even more. So I can say I want to change the hi-hat pattern to be electro. Let's see what that does. And then we can start generating a whole bunch of different grooves just through those types. All right, so I went and generated something that sounds a little bit on the nose. Like definitely that line there is way too overpowering, and that's where I want to sort of talk about some of the ways we can sculpt how it generates something. Like there's a pseudo-random version of how to do it, and then there's an actual random way of working with this thing, and I find that really cool. So randomise, we can go into here and we can go through, say I want to change the sample and folder, because that's all referencing that hat folder, and I can turn that up. We'll just solo that one. We can also mute. So using the randomise function, we can actually get a sense of changing the sample in that file. So it's going, picking a different hat, and experimenting the way I see it, it works by the percentage from that point. So it's got a list of all our samples, and then what it's done is it's taking a very specific point of that list, and it will start deviating from the out. So if you have like a really low sound, you'll hear that original sound pop up quite a lot. So if I go 1, it's only deviating a little bit, and then if we go into larger number, it's going to pick like a broader range. So how we organize our samples, we could have like really soft hits and then really hard hits, and then we could like create a humanized sort of field with just using these random functions, which I find really interesting. But just doing that sounds so much better than just having that repeating action. And then if we want to save that, because this isn't saved yet, this is just a generator that we apply to all this, we can hit this save button here. And now that's saved this pattern into memory. There's a different way that we can actually handle this. We can actually live record different automation. So if we want to change up that hi-hat sound here, what we can do is hit the live record and then actually control how the sound is happening. So I'm just going to solo that track. Cool. And I'm just going to hit live record, and then we hit play. Stop the live record. And now as we live record, it's saved those values to each of those points. So we could add like a different live record. So I might see him play with the filter. So I'm just going to solo that again. Live record, play. And that's given us some really cool variations. But we can also use like how we use this sample and folder. There's a few different ways we can change it. So like how I added that filter and change the sample. Texture has a few different functions that it's interacting with. So if we just solo play that, We'll choose texture. So it's changing the panning, it's changing a few of these effects. And then if we go through, we can like change octaves, we can change volume, space, and Duke Nuke. It just completely obliterates. The pattern just creates something really interesting and random. So usually when I'm at this stage, I'm just changing the texture to get it out of that sort of static repetitive of using a single sample into something a little bit more better. And this is where actual randomization comes in. So we have this chance value here. So if we go into this menu, it's similar to the random, like it's got a few of the same steps. However, this is continuing from when you hit play. So this one will bake it into our little grid here. So every time that note is hit, it will play that exact same value. Doesn't matter what we do, but chance will change it up every single time that we land on that note. So what I might do, we have a different ways. So it's like it always going to do it. Maybe it's a 90% chance or 10% chance. But then we can get into this like play 3, skip 1. And usually I like to come down to skip 3 and play 1. So this is starting to get into those conditional trig territories if you're familiar with the digitact or the digitone, but we can start really changing it. So what I like to do is maybe add random notes. So if we leave that to run a couple of times, and that's just extended out our song so much more, puts a little bit of unpredictability in there. Another thing, especially if you're coming from digitone, you might appreciate, like what we can do is we can save a session as we're working. So right now, if I've got randomize selected and hit save, it's going to apply our randomization. But if we're in another part of the Polyend play, it's got this session save. So what that can do is we can save what we're working on right now and start mangling it to the point where it's unrecognizable. And then we can just go hit shift reset and come straight back to that part. So if I just start playing, I'm just going to save our session and I'll just start drowning it. So it's just giving us a way that we can start interacting with the sound. All right, so we've done some changes, we've automated some things, we've added some randomization, but the Polyend play keeps up with us and gives us a few little tools to sort of figure out where we are in our track. Like before when I was like tweaking things and that, I was looking at this function here. So on the play symbol, if I have some, as you can see, there's a little orange bar that pops up and it gives me a bit of context on like how many loops there are, because this one here, I've got it set to skip to play to. I figured out that this is going to be a 4/4 bar, 4 bars that I can work with, and it's just showing me where it is in that entire loop. So if we start creating some really randomized stuff, it's going to pick up on that. And that's where I think this is really special, because it's not a set like step like that. We can start changing the steps as well. Like say I want that a bit faster, I can actually change how they're going through by selecting the track, and then I can change the track speed. So if I go times it by 3, we can start breaking up the grid, and that's so powerful. Like one thing I really like doing is I'll create these sort of, we'll pick some sample to work with. All right, so I've gone through and created a little bit of a plucky sound to add, and I've created an art pattern here. And then what I've done is I've created a sort of off-tilted loop that's going to play in the background. And there's 2 tools here. So these 2 knobs themselves, we have the track speed, which controls how fast it's going to play. So if I just sample that, and then we can change the track length. So I've just got it set to 9. So that's currently out of tilter with that. It's not a division of 4 or 8. It's going to play alongside. So if we play this with our main loop, So sometimes it syncs up, sometimes it doesn't, but it just creates these really interesting and this is where I see the Polyend play getting really into that generative territory where you can create these little parts that are continually looping over, as well as with major long parts where it runs a lot slower, which create these sort of like really extended chords that take a long time to loop over. All right, just before I move away from the sequencer itself, there's one part that I forgot to miss was the play mode. So right now, all of our tracks are going forward, but this is where we can really break away from the grid, is through this play mode. So right now it's going forward, but I can set it in reverse. And each one of these tracks can have a different way that this play mode is moving. So, and there's a whole bunch of different algorithms on how that little box is going to jump around. So just selecting different ones is going to give us a different feel on our music and just change everything up. Hey, so this is Future Jamie here working on the video, and I just forgot that I missed two of my favorite little buttons here. So there is a repeater as well. So this is something where you can actually create like re-triggering of the sample as well. But the main thing is it has a whole bunch of different ways that we can re-trig this sequence and the repeat type as well. So there's a lot of variation there, and it creates some really interesting things happening in our sequence. And the other main thing I like about this is that if we feel like our sequence works, but it's sort of just a little bit out of phase, instead of having to like press and then move the next one along, we've got this move button here, which allows us to move our sequence left and right, but we can also get into that micro move as well. If we can just nudge that thing a little bit to the left or right, and just felt like I should add those two things because for me, I really do use them, but I didn't really use it in the sort of lo-fi beat I was working on. So yeah, anyway, straight back into the video. So cool, we just made a loop, and like, how could we start taking that out into a song? So there's two ways that we can really extend this out. So first way, I want to highlight the pattern. So the pattern view here, all our song information that we just made is controlled into this one little dot here. So as you can probably tell, there's that much song information that we can have. So we can have 16 times 8 is 128 different patterns that we can have for loop information. And with the sample memory itself, we have 6 minutes of mono sample time. So we can create some massive projects to play continually over time. So what I might do is, if I want to change up that pattern that we just work on, what I can do, similar to how we copy and pasted before, I can hold this until it flashes, and then I can make a paste and bring it over. So that's our new pasted version. I can come back into here and start changing things up. So I could make these hi-hats a little bit less. I just put that into memory because I probably want the hats there. And it does get really intuitive over time. So, and I might take out some of these snares, and I might just add a cool. So we've got two different versions now, and then if I come back here, I can hit play. It's going to flash, it's going to wait until that next stage comes around, and then it'll jump onto that new track, and then we can start going on from there. And then we jumped across. So I've just done a bit of a mock-up right now. So it's like we could have a live play area, so we can like select where we want to start and hit play and start mucking around. But we can also come down here and then hold shift and play chain. And what they'll do is, once it's finished this loop here, it'll jump onto the next one and it'll keep going through until like this last point here. And we can export that. So I'm just currently in the settings. So if you go to File and then down to Export, we can export this chain as like a master. So it'll go through, play it all, and save that into memory on the SD card. Or we can have it export the stem. So we can actually save all this out as well as all the tracks, and then we can bring that into our DAW and do further processing. So it's not like we're just limited to one way of playing. It's like, this is a canvas on how you want to play. Sometimes I'll make my melodies and that, and I'll work down. So it's like each one of these is like a different type of like song or loop that I'm working on. So I have an intro and an outro, and then I can select the next part, or I can work along that way. It just really depends how I feel. But this isn't the only way we can work with our project. We have variation. So this line here, so if I select through that, right now there is all of our information is set on 1, and then we currently have 16 different variations for each one. So a variation of this could be a 16 bar loop, so right now, but if I hold shift, this is where 16, 32 or 64, so we can have 64 steps of information per line, and it doesn't need to be like a single one. Like we can have 64 steps of information per one. So I'm just going to hold and then paste that information through. So if I press these, it's going to have the same drum, but with that last one, I might add some different drums at the end to give it a bit of a feel. So we can do things generatively, or we can do things per step. So what I'm hoping to explain is Polyend hasn't built a device that has a very specific way of like, this is how you do music, or this is how you make it. You can approach this where you want to create a very static, like you control each individual step and you make the sound that you want, or you can go off the other side and get into really generative territory where you create these like little loop patterns that you can control how the sound's going and create all these different timings. So things will come in a phase and out of phase. And then you have so many different ways of controlling how you want your sound. Like you could easily just have one pattern in the pattern viewer, and then it's all controlled through the variations. Like I'm just going to copy and paste one there. And then similar to how we could control the patterns in the this view here, where it's like going and then it was playing and then it will live switch to that one. Similar to the variations as well. When you come to transition to the next one as you're playing, it will wait until that loop is finished and then jump onto the next one. So really, however you feel the way that you want to use the play, it will pretty much accommodate how you want to work. Like the way I've really gelled with the Polyend play has been through creating single page loops. Like I don't really go out of the 16 bars, but I do a lot of the work in one 16 bar. So like I'll create these off tilted patterns, or have like drum loops that will have sort of conditional trigs, or the chance and action operation here. And then as I go through looping, like different elements will come in and out, and then I can start tweaking the sound and changing it up and then being able to come back into it. So that's how I found the machine working really well for me. And then when I'm just jamming, I can create something really interesting, really fast. Or I think I've drawn enough over the sequencer right now. I think we can start going into like how we can actually play with this thing, because it is quite fun to play with. Right now I've just been showing you hit the play button and it's going to play through, but how this play is going to be interactive through the performance mode. And that's where these RGB buttons really shine, because everything is color coded. There's no like descriptors down here, which sort of put me off thinking, oh, this is going to take a bit to learn. But because of that sort of contextual information, so I'm just going to select our tracks just so I can see what we're working on. But if I press a point here, one, you're going to see it highlight like that, but it's going to tell you up here what it's doing. So if I like scroll this up, it's going to go all the way up to 2. So that's how we change our tuning. On the opposite side, that's going to decrease our tuning. This is our filters. So we've got like our low pass, and then we've got our high pass. This is our overdrive. So we can change how like full on it is. Our bit crush as well. And then we can start getting to those arrangement modes. So how we start breaking up the grid, this is the way that we can sort of change up how our sound is going to happen. And it sort of breaks up the grid in that sort of play mode. And then it's the repeat function, so we can create some like so different ways sounds are going to interact with it. So these ones change up the grids, and then these ones are your delays type. So we can change the delay type on the fly. And then it comes into the reverbs. And this last one here is our loops, which allow us to create some really start interacting with our sounds. And usually when I have one of these loops going and I'm like playing with the settings, I can jump into this area and really start changing up how that pattern plays. What I'm finding is I'll create one loop, and just with all those different ways we can interact with the loop and like perform with it, I can easily lose an hour of time just mucking around in just one little area. And I've never had that with a sort of like groovebox style machine before, where I can like just get engrossed in the sound. It doesn't feel like it's controlling how I'm making the sound. I can pick and choose what's happening. And then sometimes there's happy accidents, which in turn change how I feel about something. But it's like, I find this is something really special. So by itself is a really fun device, but when it starts playing with other things, I think that's what really makes this machine shine. So we have 8 tracks of audio information right now, but if I hold Shift and press the top right button here, we go into the Midi side of this device. And same thing again, we get 8 tracks to output Midi information. So we have a few different ways. So sample turns into like the way we output sound. So we've got 16 channels of audio via USB or with the jack itself. So usually I just use the jack because of all my hardware stuff. You can change the program. So one thing that I always benchmark with, and I'll show a bit of a visual, is my sound canvas. That thing can be a bit of a nightmare to program, but when I had it set up with the play and started mapping all the CCs, it was such an intuitive way to make music. Like I can change the program and then I can shoot chords out as well. So you're not limited to like one note on this. Same thing again, we can go into view and then send out MIDI notes that way by placing it, but we can also change the note up here. So we can output just a single note, but this is where the chord gun or the chord setup goes in. So instead of just sending out like a C sharp, we can send out a fourth, we can add a power chord, we can send out a major and minor sound, we can send out a diminished, augmented, like we've got a whole bunch of different ways we can send out MIDI information. That's all contained in that little block there. So we can have quite a lot of stuff happening at once. And same thing again, if your machine can handle programming, we can actually flip between different programs on the machine itself. Like I can program and say that's a 6 and a 9, and then we can send those bits of information to our device as we need to. So when I was playing on the sound canvas, I was able to flick between different presets and get that sort of feeling of like actually programming the sound canvas back in the day. So that being said, after using it with the sound canvas, playing it with all my other machines, it's a lot easier. But yeah, just the MIDI implementation here, it's like not too abstract between the two setups. So really, once you get like how the Polyend play works, attaching it as like the brain to your setup, it's just going to be so quick and easy. Now you could be wanting to take the Polyend play out on the road, and I would say it's definitely a portable device. Using it like with the Polyend tracker, like this is my usual go-to to taking out and about. And I have a bit of a system, though I thought I would just highlight what I like to take with me. I do keep it all in this nice little case here as well. That sits in my actual headphones case. So I carry around an Audio Technica headset, which I'm currently using right now to record with. But yeah, everything in here. So I have like this little power bank, 1000 milliamps, does the job. And just because it's such a low amperage device, you get a lot of time out of one of these little bricks here. And pretty much all the other bits that come with the Polyend play. So it's like the USB cable setup that you get. So I'm currently using it right now with that one. So I've got a spare sitting there. We have this dual 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch. So if you're at someone else's place or playing with a mate, you can connect their gear up or get it out. So if they're just running with quarter jacks. I carry a Midi DIN jack, so if I want to connect it with other bits, that's fine. And I usually just keep one of these little audio connectors, so if I want to plug it into my portable speaker, I can, and just jam away. And just with these things, like it really does like just make this machine expand out so much more. Like you could be jamming or just on the train and working away on a whole bunch of things. Now, for the device itself, like I didn't sort of look for other options. I just went straight with what Polyend supplies, which are these cases here. So I do have the older style one for the Polyend tracker, which is designed to hold on to that rotary encoder, but this one I did spend a little bit extra and I got the dust cover as well. So that's what the inside looks like. It does keep it very secure, like when you push it in there, it does force fit in there. And what the dust cover does, it actually does sit in there quite well as well. And yeah, so I'll be like using the case, and if I'm just not using the play and it's just sitting down, I just keep the dust cover on there as well. I don't really have dust covers, but I did pick up the dust cover for this one just because I have an idea to use it just for a bit of measuring. So you might see something coming out from me soon. So if it's on the studio or traveling, I know that all the buttons are protected. There's no way that I'm going to bump something and hit one of these rotary encoders and be sad. So yeah, that's how I deal with portability. And yeah, definitely take it out and about. Like, there are a few people that I've watched online. Ben gone across the USA with his Polyend play, doing a whole bunch of cool stuff. So it's definitely a machine that you can have beside you and do a whole bunch of fun stuff with. And one thing I really have enjoyed with Polyend is their commitment to firmware updates and sort of listening to the community. So I came into the Polyend play when 1.1 came around. So what that did was give us that chain feature and a few other small updates, but with 1.2 right now, what it's given us is a way to change the sound. So before, it used to be these presets, and to be honest, those presets are really good, and it just takes away from like not having this thing called get into the tweaking of settings. And it does speed up like making music, but we've got these custom variables as well, so we can actually change the parameters of the actual engine itself. So we can get in there and do a lot of fine tweaking. So they are listening to what people are saying, and I do see this having a lot of potential. Like the Polyend tracker is currently on 1.6, so I definitely see them going through a few iterations of the play and adding a whole bunch of nice features. Alright, now it comes to that fun part of any synth YouTuber video where they give their opinion, and to be honest, I'm really happy with the Polyend play. If Polyend didn't send it to me, and I do thank them so much for sending it over, I probably would have gone out of my way to try and get it somehow, because I was in the market for some sort of groovebox that I could interact with sound. So it was really Digitact and a few other devices. Not saying that this is a Digitact killer. I'm not going to start opinions like that, but it's like being able to like punch in the sounds I want and then start tweaking how the sounds are coming out. And what really drove me towards the Polyend play was the grid setup and how they sort of interact with it. There was a few things that I was a bit skeptical before actually touching the Polyend play. So I'm grateful that I had the chance to, because one thing that's really shown me is it's not designed to be used in one way. Like, you can work in it any way you want. Like you could have it so your variations is a song, and then you could use the patterns as your set. So each one of those points on it is an entire set that you can like pretty much just take the Polyend to a gig, slap it down, and that's the whole night done. Like, there are so many different ways that you can interact with the machine. Like I do like this capacitive touch feature, but as you can see, I've turned off that double tap just because I'm in like a humid climate and moisture tends to send them off a little bit silly. But this sort of mechanical way of interacting and changing the notes, that's the way I like to play. As well as with the grid, I love having everything visible here so I can see all the tracks and how they're moving instead of using the extensions here. So that might be the way that you don't like to work. You might have a different way of working, and I think that's all good about these types of devices, where it can fit anyone's purpose. And I think the massive tick for me with the Polyend play, this might not be for you, but my day-to-day, I'm always trying to eliminate busy work just because of like how much I need to do. And when I can get a device that is set up in a way that can eliminate doing certain things, then I'm really happy for it. Like, as a musician, does me punching in a 4 on the floor and like picking the drum, does that define me as a musician or creating that music intent that I was trying to get at? So using things like beat fill and Euclidean functions and then coming in and tweaking it till it gets the sound that I want. Like, in a couple of clicks, I can get a little loop going on the Polyend play, no problem. And then giving it a bit of time, I can extend it out and create some really nice songs. So it's really fast once you start getting into the framework of working, and like that time saving sort of ideal. And then once I get into groove or something, I can start blending different things I'm really interested with, because it's not like we can just do beat fills and that is, we can start blending different types of these patterns. And looking at the backend or the files for this, these are separated out into a folder. So knowing that, there might be a time where we can actually create our own sort of grooves for this sort of setup here. So it's really interesting to see how this is taken further, but I'm really happy with this right now. All right, now we've gone through the good stuff. This is sort of the area where I think there could be some improvement made. It's not saying that they're deal breakers for me, but really I think that could amplify the device. Like right now, if you get the Polyend play and load like a really massive sample pack onto the device, it does take a while. Like definitely go off, make a coffee and come back, because that's probably still loading your files. Like it is 6 minutes of audio, so once you fill it up. But that's not a deal breaker on like the device itself. Like it is trying to load the sounds onto a chip, so it's going to make playtime run a lot smoother. It's not using technologies where you got to find the right SD card and then it streams it from the SD card. They are mono sounds as well, so that might be a bit of an issue for certain people. Me coming from trackers, I'm always working with mono sounds and doing some little tricks here and there. But I've been experimenting with different ways of loading sample packs. So I did start planning to release sample packs for the Polyend tracker, especially around emulating different synth types. Like I did an FM pack, and then I brought it across for the Polyend play, and it was trying to bring like oscillators and synthesizers onto those devices, because I wanted to like sort of plot in what I wanted that sound to be, and then I could come home, plug it into that machine, and then I could pair it up and create some really nice sounds. So now that I have the play, I've sort of understand a different way to deal with sample packs. And like if you can create really small, tight little sample packs that are just dedicated to the specific thing you're doing, I think there's a tutorial in doing that. They load really quick, and then it's like you can download 2 or 3 sample packs and come up with a unique style that you want, whether that's your favorite samples for a particular genre, or like a synthesizer, you've just gone through and captured your favorite sounds for that. They do load in really quick, so you can get an idea underway really fast. Now, coming from 1.1, I was really happy when they added the custom parameters in 1.2. That was on my list because it's like as good as having some really nice presets going. Like you don't need to think about having the set ones, and it does restrict your limitations, because limits do inform creativity. At the end, I really do like tweaking those last sort of settings. But one thing I have noticed is like a lot of these like UX things, like holding down to like have it flash and double tap, some of that is not all the way through the device. When I came into Midi, I noticed one thing was like with the jack channel, like being able to control that. Coming into the program settings, I couldn't actually live record changing programs, which was something that with the sound canvas being able to bounce around a whole bunch of different sounds. Just finding those sort of little things around the device where it's like not fully around, but like that wasn't a deal breaker for me, because I could go through and program the steps, but it just would be more coherent as I'm going through. I don't need to think about how to do certain things in different areas of the device. Alright, enough about my opinions. Is this something that's going to be good for you? Now, if you're looking for a sampler groovebox, I would definitely give this a look. Now, it is $800 USD, and in Australia, we're paying about $1,400 dues for it. So it is a quite pricey machine, but that sequencer, along with the other features, is definitely hitting a lot higher than what it is. So it's going to be with you for a while anyway, just the amount of power that's there. So if you're just looking for a sequencer to help you out when you're playing along on guitar, or you're using it to move into that electronic music sort of style, like you can create full songs with this machine by itself, just going online, grabbing a bunch of the sample packs, and even with just the samples that are on there, you can create some really cool music. So I would recommend having a look at it. If you've already got a whole bunch of machines, this can definitely be a brain for your setup, just with those MIDI functions and like each one of those points being a way to send a chord. Like if you're definitely a Eurorack person, I can see this being a really cool way to interact with your modular setup. With me, with all my boxes, I really enjoy having like each one being its particular thing, having this set up some sort of generative patch, and then I'll go through, tweak everything while this is handling the drums. So definitely as a brain, it's really going to be good. If you're looking for some sort of music easel to capture ideas, like it's definitely up your alley. Like when I got the Polyend tracker, that's why I grabbed that, was to have some way to capture ideas. It's been doing really well, but if you don't gel with a tracker workflow and you want some sort of sequencer workflow, this is definitely up your alley. Like taking on the plane, the bus, just how you can have like a little power bank and have hours of play time to muck around, and you can make full tracks, export them out and put them onto your computer. Like definitely something that you can take with you and just create ideas on the fly. Alright, I think that's enough waffling, because in essence, I think the Polyend play has been such an interesting way to create music. Like over the last couple of months, you probably noticed I haven't submitted a video in a little bit, and I'm definitely sorry for that one. But yeah, I've just been time poor and like things have been falling, but having something that I could just get into music making, not like putting a 4 on the floor or thinking about like what sort of samples, I can sort of generate an idea to start with and then get straight into that music making component. This has been such a fun little thing to just have around, but I've used it in a multiple different areas to get quick ideas out, as well as making up ideas, but also getting into that sort of generative area. And I really want to highlight that in a couple of videos in the future, so definitely keep an eye out for them. As well as that utility, I think I'm going to pretty much start making a video on like making sample packs for this thing, because if you understand how to make a sample pack, this is really going to shine. And yeah, so there's going to be a few videos out, and if you think any of this was really useful, definitely give it that thumbs up, because it does tell the algorithm to point this to other people that might be looking for an opinion on the Polyend play. Also, if you are interested in the Polyend tracker or the Polyend play and trying to figure out which one you want, definitely leave a comment down below of your questions, because I want to do a comparison of both of them. Because on paper, like 8 mono samples, it does look like apples and apples, but this does behave very differently to the tracker. So I sort of want to highlight that as well. So in essence, I hope you found this one enjoyable and useful, and yeah, I hope to see you around here again.